The reason I'm talking about a passive construction in Tibetan is because, typologically speaking, it's very interesting that there might be a passive construction in a variety of Tibetan. Tibetan has commonly been described as having no grammatical voice. So finding such a construction in any variety of Tibetan is at least interesting to people who are interested in Tibetan like myself, but probably also interesting, hopefully, to people working in other languages and people working in typology and historical linguistics. So to begin with, sure, is it? Oh, sure.
No.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
All right, does this work? Okay, so just to provide a little bit of interest about, a little bit of background information about bDechen, it is included in, I believe, Gesang Jumian's description. He classifies it as Southern Com. It is spoken here in Yunnan province, northern Yunnan province, right kind of close to the border with the TAR, labeled Tibet here on this map. And this is bDechen Prefecture, where bDechen is spoken. So as you can see, it's the area is quite diverse, and this is bDechen Prefecture, which is divided into 3 counties. bDechen Tibetan is spoken here. In the south, this is an autonomous Lisu County. Over here, this is Shangri-La, formerly called Zhongdian, and known to Tibetans usually as Gyaltang. So here we go. So Gyaltang Khams Tibetan would be kind of the lingua franca for these 2 yellow areas, and it is closely related, but not especially similar to bDechen Tibetan. Yes. Sure, or how about I just use this one? I'm fine with this one.
Okay.
All right. Okay, and then in the south, you have Lisu, but you also have languages that are Tibeto-Burman, but not very genetically similar to Tibetan. So you have Na, you have Lolo, also called Yi. I believe you have, oh gosh, anyway, there's quite a lot of them. And sorry, so to the north, up kind of close to the Chinese on the left, you'll see sort of white coming down into the middle of that yellow-green area. To the right of that is the area where this dialect that I've been studying is spoken. And so it's very close to the border with the TAR. And so this is probably the most important geographical feature of this region. It's the Meili mountain range. But most of the inhabited parts of the area look like this, and this is a monastery very close to where my speaker is from. Ngapa Dewa is the name of the village that the monastery is in. And so just to go back, so what you might notice is that these are houses, these are permanent structures, it's nice and green, people like to farm in this place. And this is Shemping village, which is where my speaker is from, so it's already pretty urbanized, and this is kind of an aerial view that just gives you a sense of where people live geographically. So there are lots of high peaks, but most of the population is condensed in the valleys, and there's quite a bit of distance between the different settlements. So just to sum up really quickly, the sociolinguistic background of this area is it's a farmer variety. If you've had any experience reading Tibetan linguistic literature, you'll know that people talk about nomad or cattle breeder varieties versus farmer varieties. Cattle breeder varieties tend to be not necessarily homogeneous, but people talk about them in terms of having high mutual intelligibility, and that goes across pretty drastic different geographic distances. And farmer varieties are basically described as being incredibly diverse, sometimes to the point that people will say that we don't understand the people in the next village over. So with modern highways and stuff, people who might be connected to each other by, say, an hour by bus, they're not able to communicate with each other using their dialects. So while the Dechen County itself is quite ethnically diverse, individual villages tend to be ethnically homogeneous. So the Shenping district is largely Tibetan, and the villages within it are ethnically homogeneous. But outside of this district, lots of other ethno-linguistic groups. So people tend to use Chinese as a lingua franca, and that's something that's been going on probably for at least 100 years. And another thing to know is that Tibetan literacy is not a priority in public schools anywhere in Yunnan province, but certainly not in Dechen. So it's easy to, for example, my primary speaker, she speaks Tibetan quite well. It is her dominant language, but she is a learning reader of Tibetan, and she is also a highly fluent speaker of English, literate in English, and a near native speaker of Chinese, including being highly literate in Chinese. Sorry. All right, so just to get back to what this passive construction is, it's primarily made up of two morphological components, which is evidential markers, combined with this ergative marking. And so there's this ergative marker has two forms, ki or yi or e, and it appears to occur in all varieties and date back to Old Tibetan. So as long as there have been written texts of Tibetan, my understanding is these markers show up in it. Something that might be interesting to you, I don't know, is that languages that are considered to be closely related to Tibetan, say for example languages spoken in Nepal, or even some of the Jarongik or Changik languages spoken in Sichuan area, they don't have this marker, these markers. So this happened sometime after these languages broke off. And I say that they're allomorphs with a question mark because in most dialects they're described as being, their different distributions are described as being morphophonological. But at least in one variety of Southern Coms, yi appears to be only used as an instrumental and never as an actual ergative marker. And so, something else. So these markers are written the same in any variety that has actual literacy, and they tend to be pronounced the same, and so agent or ergative marking and instrumental marking seem to be marked by the same form, with the exception of this Southern Coms dialect, where it seems like yi has emerged only as an instrumental marker. So this is the orthography if you're interested. And the marker on the right is realized, as far as I know, in every dialect as a rising of the vowel. So it only occurs in open syllables, and when it shows up, it just results in whatever the value of the vowel being raised. So if you have a pronoun ko, it becomes ke. And yes, in all varieties, all forms seem to occur as case markers for both agents and instruments. Where the difference kind of comes up in is that these markers tend to be used, they tend to have different distributional properties in different varieties of language and different varieties of Tibetan, And part of this is somewhat related to the nature of agent-oriented verbs. So I've just sort of thrown these all up here. And I'm going to consult my notes here for a second. Please bear with me. But one of the reasons why we say that Tibetan doesn't have a passive construction is because the point of a passive construction is that you have some kind of clause-level structure in the language that's very rigid. So for example, subjects always do this. And that's kind of clause-level structure, but then you have at an information structure level, or perhaps just a pragmatic level, a need maybe to promote, for example, instead of the subject, instead of the agent, maybe the agent is always in the subject position syntactically in a language, but you want to promote the patient. So then you would need to go ahead and do some kind of special marked morphosyntactic process in order to make that possible. But you don't actually have to do that in Tibetan. So one of the strategies that most varieties of Tibetan have is they have what is basically non-syntactically constrained prodrop. So you don't have to have, the only obligatory constituent of a finite clause is the verb. You don't need to have the subject, you don't need to have the object, you can just have the verb. So if you want to demote an agent, you can drop it off and just have the patient. Another thing is that many varieties have fairly free word order, so you can also move the object in front of the patient. And then you have something else, which is a strategy that is not present in equal levels in every variety, but it starts off in Old Tibetan being quite strong, and that is you have different lexical classes of verbs. So you have agent-oriented verbs and you have patient-oriented verbs. And these examples are from Volman 2007. So etymologically, the two verbs in clause 1 and clause 2 are related. They both have to do with frightened, but the verb in the first clause is a causative version. So it means to frighten someone else. And in the second clause, it means to be frightened, so it's patient-oriented. And some of the dialects preserve both of these forms, and some of them don't. But so you end up with the translation, the llama frightened away the birds with a loud noise. And then you have the equivalent, number 2, the llama, the birds got frightened away by the llama. So llama shows up in the first position in both clauses, but because of the verb, we know that the subject, you might say, the controller of the verb in 2 is birds, and the controller of the verb in 1 is llama. And then you have, these are just some other examples that I'll sort of rush through. But in this one, you can see that you don't need to have any kind of agent or instrument. You can simply have birds and frightened, and they give you you still can kind of end up with a translation related to, I guess, whether, what am I trying to say here? Yes. So basically, in number 5, we know that something made the birds become frightened. And in number 6, the birds got frightened away, or another way to translate it might just be to say that they became frightened. All right, so in Standard Tibetan, which is what some people call Lhasa Tibetan, because they sort of commonly promoted language of textbooks and the media is slightly different from the language spoken by residents of Lhasa proper. The Ergative Marker is actually, I've glossed it as ergative, but a lot of people refer to it as subject marking. And it is more or less a kind of active marker. That's not always true. There's definitely a split. So it is obligatory for transitive agents in perfective clauses. It is optional for intransitive intransitive subjects of perfective clauses, primarily subjects that are either speech act, so either the speaker or the listener, so speech act participants, in perfective clauses. And in imperfective clauses or present clauses, it appears to be optional or governed by pragmatic constraints, and it seems to not be possible in future clauses. But one thing I would point out is that, excuse me. All right, so for number 8, the S, so the ergative marker on the agent is obligatory if the subject follows the object. So if the word order varies, then it becomes obligatory, at least in this dialect. And these are examples of it showing up obligatorily in intransitive clauses. And when it shows up in intransitive clauses, it has a sense of like, I intended to do this. So it's usually, it's highly correlated with egophoric or sort of first-person evidential marking. And as with transitive clauses, it just doesn't occur in future contexts. Okay, so then there's other things that speakers can use to sort of tell who is the subject, so to speak, of the clause. And these include the evidential markers. So he played soccer. This song means it's perfective. It also means that the speaker is not the agent of this. The speaker was not an active participant, but the speaker was a participant in some way, probably a witness. So it can be understood as I, the speaker, saw him play, but it can also be understood as I, the speaker, heard the game and him, but didn't see it or him. But at any rate, I was aware of the event transpiring as it happened. And so we know that because of song. And then a similar example would be this marker Chung. So having Chung here, we know that the speaker is also a non-volitional or a non-controlling participant of the action. So I was not actively involved in this event as it transpired, but it happened to me somehow. It affected me, and so it's Chung. And so we could leave off both of these arguments or just have the agent, and we would still understand that the speaker is the patient of this clause. Likewise with number 15, here's that song again. So because it means the speaker was not a active participant, I was not in control of the event, it transpired without my cognition. It does, in fact, occur sometimes with first-person speech act participants. And that actually, there shouldn't be an ergative marker there. That should just be nga, not ngi. My apologies. Okay, so just to kind of recapitulate, subject marking in Standard Tibetan, it's subject marking and not really strictly a language with strong ergative tendencies, because this marker is tracking much more information structure or pragmatic structure. At a semantic level, it's tracking participant roles, but it's not really telling us a lot about clause structure. So when you get to Amdo-Tibetan, it's definitely an ergative marker. So it's, oh gosh, all right, I'm gonna just go on to this. Okay, so the reason I would say that it's an ergative marker in Amdo-Tibetan is because it is obligatory in transitive, in clause structures that are transitive. So it occurs with verbs that maybe are not understood as being transitive, that are lower on the transitive hierarchy scale, but they're always there. So now agent marking in Dich and Com. So transitive clauses display two different morphosyntactic patterns. They can be active or they can be passive, and this means that there is a grammatical expression of voice in Dich and Com that's important. Active clauses have a rigid SO order, so OS is not possible in an active clause. You have to do something morphosyntactically outside of morphosyntactically marked to change that order. Like the other dialects, both S and O can be zeroed, and you can also get rid of the object. But if the object is present, the subject must also be present. And there's no marking to distinguish S from O, so word order alone does that. And then in the passive, you have flexible AO order. A is optional, O is obligatory, so it's the reverse. And A is distinguished from O by agent marking. So here we go. So ko nga dong tian na, he beat me. This is passive. So na, again, it's direct evidence. It means the speaker was not an active participant. So in this case, the speaker was an active participant because they were the ones getting beaten up. And then in 23, nga dong tian na. And so the primary difference between these and the verb is the evidential marker. But you'll notice that only word order tells us who is doing what to whom. So in this one, you can't change the order of them, and you also can't have nga show up basically in the subject position, and also have it be marked as direct evidence. That's just ungrammatical, it seems. So for passive, nga dong tian, I was beaten. Nga kuki dong tian. So both of these are acceptable. I was beaten, where the agent isn't mentioned at all. But if we want to mention the agent, it seems like more often than not, the agent will occur in the second position, not always. And the agent must be marked with a key. And it seems like the agent can sometimes precede the first person, but I guess that's not a typically common construction. And these are just some more examples that sort of let you know about tracking for that. What's really interesting is when you talk about third-on-third transitive clauses. So in this case, it seems like you have a true passive, which is in the sense that there is semantically no agent. And in those kinds of clauses, you have this form magi, which is etymologically the word for me plus this ergative marker. And what this means is he was beaten. He could have been beaten by a person. He could have been beaten by monsters, or who knows. There's no... You're not expected to know who did the beating, and you don't care. We just know that he was beaten. Whereas in 31, he was beaten by that person we talked about. So it's a pro-drop. It's in reference to an agent that we've already discussed. Okay, and if you wanted to talk about two people differently, two third-person agents, you would say this, ko koki dong tiana, koki ko dong tiana. These ones. All right, and then I had thrown in some data from other Southern Kham dialects that sort of demonstrate that they don't do this. So Batang is actually close to Amdo, and perhaps because of its location, it seems to be an ergative language. So this marker, in this case, ku, just this vowel raising is obligatory in all transitive agents. And it even shows up in example 35. It's not necessarily something that is high in the transitive hierarchy. And then in contrast, jiaotang, it seems like the ergative only shows up in pragmatic contexts. And if you'll remember from my map before, jiaotang is right next door to where bDechen is spoken. All right, that's it.
Okay, so
yeah, my name is again Rapsal. I teach Tibetan language.
Yeah.
Rapsal, use the mic.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I did not prepare the question, so my things are random. The first, I think I want to. Can you go back to your verb pur and the pur?
Okay.
Yeah, so I think pur is a volitional verb, pur is a non-volitional verb.
Yes.
So therefore, I think pur don't attack any ergative mark there, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's because I think the category of verbs, not kind of I think that things, right?
Yes, it has a different participant, a different semantic participant.
Yeah, so in that theory, kind of to like a che and che, cha and cha, to break and to be broken. And that category can be applied, I think, everything on your theory, I think. Another my kind of mark is that I don't speak bDechen language. I'm sorry. I'm more familiar with the Amdo and the Lhasa dialect, right? And I think this is maybe a question. I think the marker Migi and the another was third person uses Kogi. You can find the trace of those two in Lhasa dialect, in Amdo dialect. Migi is by someone, and Kogi maybe by the third person, Kong. So if that tag is still stay in the Tibetan ergative or Cheda system, I think don't go beyond that.
So, yes, thank you very much for your comments, Ginla. That's very informative for me. So the thing about Mickey, you are right. Yes, it is me plus this ergative marker. And this is kind of a bad example because it has beaten, and I think usually it is a human being that does beatings. But my understanding of it is, for example, one example that I was given is the window was broken, and it would be Mickey as well. And it could be by a rock. She said it could be there was a rock that threw into the window. Maybe a person did it, but you're not sure. So you would just use this marker as a way to let you know, because otherwise you'll notice if you don't have Migi, if you just say ko dong tian na, it looks quite a bit like, well, it looks like this one, but also it looks like it looks kind of like this one, right? So if I get rid of the nga, I don't know if ko is the agent, is the one who did it, or is the one who had it happen to them. And so because this, what I think has happened is that the ergative marker has become constrained in its distribution. So it's not every transitive agent, as in amdo, but it's also not optional, like lhasa. So it now only sort of occurs in a situation where, I guess the functional difference between the Lhasa system and this system is that in Lhasa, it's sort of emphasizing the agent, especially when you think about it occurring in intransitive clauses, like who went, ni, you know, ni chinsong, like I went. If there's something kind of emphatic or extra emphasis being added to the agent. But in a passive construction, the agent is sort of semantically demoted a little bit, or pragmatically demoted. So the functions of them have kind of diverged into opposite directions. But I do want to say that all of this data that I've presented here was elicited. And so that is something, and the person that I was working with, she's actually a PhD student at, I think, at the University of Virginia, I'm not sure, but she's highly fluent in Chinese, she's highly fluent in English. Both of these languages have passives. But she was fairly consistent about her sense of this. So I went by that, but before I would actually publish a paper or something with these conclusions, I would want to look at actual narrative texts, and I would want to go over this. Yeah. So yes, you're right, it's all the same morphosyntactic substance of other dialects, which don't have a passive, and so for that reason, it's definitely kind of a tenuous claim that I'm putting out there. So thank you very much.
I have one more question, well, quick question. This is a very kind of sincere question.
Oh, yes.
How you apply the difference of transitive and intransitive verb in Tibetan verbs? Right?
I would say, honestly, because if you go back, for example, to the frightened example, right? So, I mean, there's no grammatical voice, and so in some ways, there's not really, I wouldn't necessarily say like a verb is a transitive verb. I mean, in amdo, I would say it because it can take an agent that's marked with ergative. So there's morphosyntactic reasons to say that a verb in amdo is transitive. So I can't say, like I can't say, nga kha za mendu, you know, nga kha mza. I can't say that. It has to be ni kha mza. It always has to be ni for I eat. It always has to be the ergative form, at least in my experience with that. But in Lhasa, no, that's not true. So transitivity is definitely a murkier issue in Tibetan.
Yeah, I think it's to do with a relationship between a verb and a subject.
Yes, yes.
If you know, if they attack ergative or not. So
yes.
I think that otherwise you can't make how you say distinguish between these two if you look relationship between a verb and verb and object.
Yes, yes, you are right. Yes.
Yeah, that's all. Thank you very much for the questions. I think there will be a chance to talk more individually for both of you. And Zia, thank you very much for
yes, thank you.
presentation. So now the session is over, and